Yeah, it's something. Can I have everybody's attention? Sorry, it's just me again interrupting your lunch. But we want to hear the presidential address by Alan Ponak. So I just want to just make one quick announcement on the program that's following. There's 3 concurrent sessions right after lunch, one in the Rivers Room, which is right around the corner, one right across the hallway. The employment arbitration concurrent session is downstairs in the lobby level. So if you're looking for that, you're going to have to go downstairs. Enough with the announcements. I get to introduce the introducer. So without further ado, Andrew Sims is going to introduce our president.
Colleagues, it's a tremendous privilege for me to be asked to introduce my dear, long-standing friend, Dr. Alan Ponak, as he delivers the presidential address to this Academy. I hope to offer you just a brief glimpse of Alan Ponak, the man I've come to know over these last 33 years, and I also hope to touch on the qualities needed for a president and why Alan Ponak has those qualities. I do hesitate right now in the home of the brave and the land of the free in opining on what makes an excellent president. Not all the qualities on my scorecard seem to command universal acceptance. It's trite to say it's a great honor to be chosen as the President of the National Academy. But I'd ask you to remember that that is only true because the President is selected as a person trusted to follow so many distinguished past presidents who have each worked to build a more meaningful, involved academy, who have helped define and enhance what the Academy stands for. The honor is being thought as someone up to that work, not just for the prestige that goes with the title. Alan Ponak was born on Guy Fawkes Day, 1949. He grew up in the rich cultural community of Montreal during the Quiet Revolution of the 50s and 60s. It's that Jewish community in Montreal that produced superstars like Leonard Cohen and Mordecai Richler. Very much like Leonard Cohen, Alan cannot sing well. Like Mordecai Richler, Alan can write brilliant fiction, as those of you who've read his awards can attest. Alan earned a BA from McGill, a master's from Michigan State, and a PhD from the University of Wisconsin. He has, as a result, a very clear-headed understanding of the commonalities and differences between our two great nations, their industrial relations systems and their history. Alan has had 2 careers, running roughly parallel to each other. First, he is a highly respected academic. He began his career teaching at UBC when, in 1976, our colleague Mark Thompson picked him up at the airport, Alan with skis over his shoulder, perhaps with his passion for sports and travel still tempering somewhat his academic enthusiasm. In 1980, Alan taught at McGill. I'm a bit of a fan of genealogy, and each of us has had role models. Alan was influenced at McGill by the indomitable, the late Frances Bairstow, who many of you know as a long-standing member of this academy. She, in turn, grew up under the influence of the legendary Alan Gould. Alan, in turn, has mentored so many students, and I like to think that he passes on that genealogical history, that inspiration. In 1981, Alan spent a year traveling in Southeast Asia, a trip often repeated and a passion never lost. It is the pictures from that period of travel that resulted in my being prohibited from illustrating this speech with photographs. In 1982, Alan moved to the University of Calgary, where I got to know him, where his academic career fully blossomed, and where he began his second career as an arbitrator. Alberta is not the warmest clime for trade unions. We aren't the center of Canada's industrial activity. However, Alan quickly embarked on building ties with the labor relations community. We first met at the second annual Labor Management Arbitration Conference. Founded by Alan, nurtured by Alan, that is an annual event now in its 36th year. Through that conference, he built a robust and collegial labor relations community in the province that has been a model in Canada. It is solidly tripartite. It's truly a gathering of the clans. It was built by a combination of Alan's work, Alan's worry, those who know him well will understand that, Alan's credibility, and his good humor. During Alan's academic career, he built a strong arbitration practice, but he also formed the Industrial Relations Research Group and raised the money to fund his students. He produced and won an LA Film Festival Silver Screen Award for a documentary film, Beyond Collision, High Integrity Labor Relations. He, with others, has produced what is now, I think, in its 5th or 6th edition, the leading text in Canada, Union Management Labor Relations in Canada. And he's published more articles and mentored more colleagues and students than I could begin to count. Alan has received many works and many honors for his work, most notably the Gérard Dion Award from the Canadian Industrial Relations Association, of which he was the president, and the 2015 Boer-Alaskan Award for his outstanding contribution to Canadian labor relations, joining in that our former president, Michel Pichet. Over his 30 years or more in Alberta, the parties have trusted Alan with literally thousands of arbitration appointments. That shows that organizing conferences and working so hard at tripartite relations can fulfill Tom Lear's description of the old dope peddler, you'll remember, doing well by doing good. The whole can be more than the sum of the parts. That is true of Alan's greatest collaboration, which is his marriage to a brilliant academic in her own right, Daphne Taras. Daphne, too, taught at the University of Calgary, although more recently she has been Dean of the Edwards School of Business in Saskatoon. They collaborate, cajole, and tease each other. They grapple with raising a blended family, make a tale of two cities work, and generally each enhance the already substantial achievements of the other. Most recently, I would mention their collaboration in running a major and annual training conference for arbitrators in Cambodia, itself a tremendous achievement. If being president of the Academy is not just an honor, what makes a person a great president? Any organization must call on a variety of skills. In law firms, we speak of the need to have a finder, a minder, a binder, and a grinder. The Academy needs similar skills, and luckily, Alan has many of them. The Academy reflects all the cultural diversity of the United States and Canada, and a president must understand the nuances of difference in people and in arbitration practice. It's an organization that meets in conclaves like this, but does so much of its work regionally and in committees, which requires somebody to visit, stay in touch with, and inspire people to volunteer for all the work that is involved. It requires a diplomat, a small p politician, to move the work forward rather than having it stagnate in endless debate. The Academy must also have a purpose, an overarching raison d'etre that is firmly tied to the institution of arbitration as a tool for labor and management peace and efficiency. The Academy springs from the basic notion that industrial disputes are best resolved when the parties have the freedom and responsibility to appoint their own decision-makers and to craft their own rules for adjudication. The Academy's role must be to foster quality, creativity, and independence in those arbitrators chosen by the parties to make their system work. The President of the Academy inevitably exemplifies the values of the organization. Alan Ponak is a tremendous example of all that the Academy stands for. Its work has been the focus of his entire academic and his arbitration careers. It is what he has worked for inside and outside the Academy. It is work that has made him worthy of the honor of being our president, and I invite you to listen to his presidential address.
Holy mackerel, that was nice. And I wrote very little of it. All right. Well, thank you, Andy. And well, it's wonderful to be standing here in front of you. I want to start with a few thank yous. Andy, I certainly appreciated everything that you said, and it really resonates, and I think it resonates with all of us in the room. I want to start by thanking my wife, Daphne, without whose love and support I wouldn't be standing here. Without you, Daphne, and our family, not much would be worthwhile, and I think most of us with families and spouses understand my sentiments. Thank you, Daphne. You make my life worthwhile. As I look over this room, there are so many friends who I could mention. In fact, rather than give a speech, maybe I should simply talk about each and every one of you. Might be easier. But I'd like to recognize three colleagues whose roles have been especially dear. Francis Bairstow, my first IR professor, who became a lifelong coach, supporter, friend, and cheerleader. I know how proud Francis would have been to see me here today in this role. May your memory be forever blessed, Francis Bairstow. Mark Thompson, you hired me for my first academic job at UBC, and as Andy mentioned, I showed up for my interview with my skis, boots, and poles, not really looking like a serious academic. In fact, I probably wasn't at that time. Besides hiring me, Mark, you showed me how someone could be both an outstanding academic and an exceptional arbitrator. Being good at both takes special skills, and Mark, you provided a wonderful role model for how this could be done. Thank you very much. Mark? You're sitting right there. Chris Knowlton, you set an example of leadership. Your role in revitalizing the Academy's Research and Education Foundation took courage, energy, and political skill. Watching you accomplish what you did taught me what leadership can be. Thank you for that, and thank you for your friendship. Chris? As so many presidents have said and have commented on before me, the regional meetings and going around to the different regions is absolutely one of the best part of being president. I managed to get to 10 different regions, in one of the most interesting political years this country has seen and probably will continue to see for a long time. You know, I have a number of jokes, and after last night's Brexit vote, they're not quite as funny as I might have thought. And it certainly would be inappropriate to me as a Canadian to tell my American colleagues how you should vote. I don't want to be accused of being an imperialist. It would not be. All I can say is our Prime Minister has really great hair. But a couple of comments. I think I opened the meeting by saying so. I just want to remind you Canada really does have a very generous policy of sponsoring refugees. But be quick. Depending on the outcome, we're also thinking of building a wall. Maybe Mexico will pay for it too if we offer a 2-for-1. Anyways, yeah, people are laughing now. I hope we're still laughing in 6 months. Let me now turn to the substance of what I want to say. My theme is challenges and responses, and I'm going to begin with a very brief historical excursion. The National Academy of Arbitrators was founded in 1947. World War II had just ended, and as many of you in this room can recall, that was a joke, obviously not a very good one. And the United States and Canada were moving rapidly from war production to a consumer-based economy. Collective bargaining was on the ascendancy. It had surged after the passage of the Wagner Act. By 1947, more than 1/3 of workers were covered by collective bargaining agreements, and coverage remained close to that level throughout most of the 1960s. When the Academy was born, the need for people who knew how to solve labor disputes was self-evident. So too was the need for authoritative information. The first edition of El Khoury, not El Khoury and El Khoury, El Khoury was published in 1952 and was followed a few years later by a massive tome, which some of you in graduate school in the 1960s and in law school would have remembered reading, called The Impact of Collective Bargaining on Management. I mean, it was big. But it was an important volume because it talked about all of the things that arbitrators and collective bargaining agreements covered, what arbitrators were doing, and it was those kinds of source material were crucial in this growing field. Industrial relations was a growing field, and it was a very good time to be an arbitrator. It was also a wonderful time to be a student of industrial relations. I benefited, and as Andy has mentioned, from great teachers attracted to this important field. At McGill, I was taught by Francis Bairstow and H.D. Woods. Woods went on to become the first Canadian president of the Academy and authored the Woods Report that laid the foundation for Canada's modern IR system. At Michigan State, I took classes from Jack Stieber and Charles Killingsworth. Killingsworth was another NAA president, and he taught me my first course on arbitration. And wow, he was tough. He was I hope I learned well. I went to Wisconsin and studied under Jack Barbash, Jim Stern, and James Jones. Ed Krinsky took me to my first arbitration. The Wisconsin Employment Relations Commission was a pioneer that other states emulated. My classmates included Tom Kochen and Hoyt Wheeler. Tom's sitting there. And they're current members of the Academy. Like most in the Academy, I grew up in an era where collective bargaining was expected to be an enduring part of our economic landscape. Arbitration, as a treasured child of collective bargaining, was held in high esteem. Arbitrators were widely admired and respected. Today, we face a vastly different environment. I'm not here to lament the passing of a bygone era, but I actually really do lament my Wisconsin days at the very least from what I can recall of them. But I'm here to urge the Academy and those who value labor arbitration to squarely confront the realities of today. That reality is that as collective bargaining coverage evaporates and corrupt forms of arbitration flourish, our brand of arbitration is increasingly under attack. The universal respect for labor arbitration that was a bedrock for most of us in the Academy can no longer be taken for granted. Criticism of arbitration awards and arbitrators is nothing new, of course. One side's usually unenthusiastic about any given decision. I'm still waiting for an unsuccessful party in a case where they really thought they should and were going to win to say, hey, Alan, your logic and analysis was so compelling, now we know we deserve to lose. I really wish we were as smart as you. I'm just wondering if I could go around and say, all those who've had that told to them, please stand up. It's not going to be very many. Some arbitrations have always attracted a certain amount of public scrutiny. Public sector interest arbitrations, uniformed services, especially police, teachers accused of misconduct. The only private sector disputes that routinely attract attention come from pro sports. A-Rod, Deflategate, and for Canadians, the recent Dennis Weidman decision on a suspension for hitting a referee. Arbitrators have long accepted that some criticism is a price to be paid for the privilege of doing what we do. But the tone's changed. Criticism is one thing. Contempt, personal attacks, and a complete lack of respect are quite another. Here are some examples of what I mean. Chicago Tribune. Some firefighters had been dismissed for padding their mileage reports. The arbitrator reinstated them, leading to an editorial that denounced the decision, calling it, quote, breathtaking, and commenting that, quote, even after we've read it, we can't believe it. In the decision, the arbitrator made an allusion to Alice in Wonderland. The editorial ended with, quote, as for the arbitrator, would it be too draconian to shout, off with his head? The short answer, yes, Chicago Tribune, that's too draconian. Cleveland Plain Dealer. The Cleveland mayor blasted arbitrators who, quote, reject punishment meted out by police leaders and have thwarted the city's attempt to get rid of officers who do bad things. Education Action Group website. An arbitrator reinstated a teacher alleged to have used physical force against her students. This conservative website had this to say, quote, what an insult to students, parents, taxpayers, and the concept of home rule. The arbitrators assigned to these cases did not work in the schools with the teachers in question. They had no idea what was really going on and were in no position to determine what was best for the districts and their students. New York Times. After an arbitrator reinstated a prison guard accused of using excessive force, the Time wrote an editorial highly critical of the arbitrator's decision to overturn the dismissal and substitute a suspension. It stated, quote, that arbitrators often end up splitting the baby to keep both sides satisfied and ensure they're chosen for future cases. In other words, the arbitrator was accused of throwing the case out of self-interest. New York Daily News. Yeah, not to be confused with the New York Times. Those are different newspapers. New York Daily News is like one step above the National Enquirer, and even that on some days is debatable. But this was the most egregious example that certainly arose during my presidency, and it came out of an interest arbitration decision for New York City Police. The arbitrator awarded the police a 1% increase. In response, 1,000 cops, 1,000, picketed the arbitrator's home. They carried a coffin and large posters with the arbitrator's photo with a big X through the photo. How would you feel if you had 1,000 police outside your home carrying a coffin with your picture on it, not the coffin, the photo, with your picture on it with an X through it? The New York Daily News published front-page stories, including one that began with the words, "No wonder he's a one-percenter." Among other things, the police union accused the arbitrator of having quote, sold out the cops so he could get more mediation business from the city. The reference to mediation business shows the level of understanding of what it is we do. It's not my job, nor is it the Academy's, to defend the merits of any particular decision. But we ought to be concerned about defending respect for the process. When arbitrators are bullied or threatened, how else to describe the mass picketing with posters in a coffin of an arbitrator's home? Or a mayor blames the ills of the police department on arbitration, or an arbitrator is accused of deciding a case a certain way to get more business. It casts a shadow on everything we stand for. Not only for arbitrators, but for unions and employers who rely on the integrity of arbitration to bring stability and some amount of justice to the workplace. Why now? Why are the attacks on arbitration and arbitrators becoming more vitriolic? Well, one explanation is it simply may be the times in which we live. Rage and bombast, I'm not referring to anyone in particular, accelerated through social media, have replaced analysis and facts. But in my opinion, there are a couple of deeper causes. First is the spread of what's been accurately described as cram-down arbitration. Arbitration forced on a weak party by the party with all the power. This kind of arbitration has become widespread for consumers in commercial activities and non-union employment. Chances are your credit cards, insurance policies, and car rental agreements require arbitration. It's not a kind of arbitration that people in this room would be familiar with. It's not voluntary or created between two relatively equal parties. More often than not, it's heavily tilted in favor of the more powerful party against the weaker party. Unlike labor arbitration, there's no guarantee that the arbitrator will be neutral, experienced, or competent. Unlike academy arbitrators, there's no enforceable code of professional standards and ethics to which arbitrators must adhere. Our system's been hijacked by those who are trading on the good name of arbitration to advance their own self-interests. The consequences, unfortunately, are too predictable. A New York Times article described what happened in Massachusetts in a nursing home. An elderly resident, frail but sound of mind, celebrated her 100th birthday with her family. They went on an outing. They had a barbecue. For some time, the family had been complaining and pleading with the nursing home to have their mother move to a different room because their mother's roommate was unstable and violent. Nothing was done, and the worst happened. The family's pleas were ignored, and one day their mother was killed by her roommate. The family sued, but was advised that the contract with the nursing home required arbitration, so they went to arbitration. The arbitration firm running the hearing had previously handled 400 cases for the law firm representing the nursing home. The arbitrator ruled in favor of the nursing home. His ruling consisted of a single check mark without reasons. This kind of so-called arbitration gives all arbitration a bad name. The irony is that the spread of arbitration beyond labor relations should have been a triumph for a method of alternative dispute resolution that we pioneered. Instead, it's become a bludgeon by the strong against the weak, damaging all arbitration, including what we do. It hasn't helped that the U.S. Supreme Court has foreclosed class action arbitration. In the public mind, and all too often the media, no distinction is made between the righteous arbitration under collective bargaining agreements and the process that calls itself arbitration but is not. The entire arbitration brand has been sullied, making it easier to attack the integrity of labor arbitrators. We're collateral damage. But there's another reason why respect for labor arbitration has diminished: the continuing decline of collective bargaining coverage. In 2015, union density in the United States stood at 11% overall. It was 35% in the public sector and just 7% in the private sector. Had the Supreme Court not deadlocked on the Friedrichs case, public sector collective bargaining might have been dealt a fatal blow. The decline of collective bargaining coverage is not unique to the United States. Similar trends have been apparent in Britain, Germany, and Australia. But it's much more dramatic in this country. The decline in collective bargaining has been the result of many factors that have been well documented in the academic literature, in particular the movement of manufacturing jobs, the core strength of the private sector labor movement, to other countries. The gig economy, where people compete for pieces of work, has accelerated the disintegration of traditional sources of union members. Public policy has also played a role. In hindsight, the Taft-Hartley Act, with its insidious right-to-work option, planted the seeds for the eventual destruction of organized labor. Conservative organizations have long pushed for anti-collective bargaining legislation, and they've achieved some notable successes. Witness the 2012 events in the state of Wisconsin, something that was unimaginable when I was a student there in the 1970s. Canada's been one of the few advanced industrial economies where collective bargaining coverage has remained stable at around 1/3 of the workforce. Canada and the United States have many of the same companies and the same unions. We're each other's biggest trading partners, and our economies are heavily intertwined. The Wagner Act model continues to form the backbone of our own labor legislation. But there are crucial differences that matter. Canada doesn't have right to work. In fact, we have the opposite. Early on, Canada eliminated the free rider problem. With some slight variation from province to province, unions are entitled by law to have a minimum agency shop. We call it the RAND formula, where employees are free to join or not join the union, but all members of the bargaining unit have to pay union dues. This gives unions resources to service their members effectively and to organize. Recent Supreme Court of Canada decisions have ruled that collective bargaining and the right to strike are part of the freedom of association, giving these activities constitutional status under Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The full impact of this constitutional benediction is yet to be played out, but there's little doubt it provides a whole new layer of protection for collective worker rights and processes such as arbitration that are part of those rights. The kinds of attacks on labor arbitrators and labor arbitration that I described earlier are rare in Canada, and when they occurred, the attacks lack the vitriol of an off-with-his-head comment. In the United States, by contrast, as collective bargaining rights are eroded and union density falls off a cliff, labor arbitration has simply become less relevant for large parts of the economy. Labor arbitration has become a shrinking part of the economic landscape and increasingly isolated. In my opinion, it's always easier to attack the weak than the strong. Now, that's the depressing part of my, I'm like standing here and I'm thinking, geez, this is depressing. I mean, he kind of didn't look like that depressed a person. I mean, I am happy. I have a wonderful family. I have a wonderful wife. And I'm like listening to myself and saying, geez, are we going to go back into sessions and talk about things that we like to do? But, okay, that's the depressing part. But it is a reality that I think we in this organization and we in labor relations and we as arbitrators have to be cognizant of. So let me turn now to what needs to be done and is already being done. The Academy, as the preeminent organization of labor and employment arbitrators, has a role to play in returning workplace arbitration to the respected place it deserves. We need to get the message out that arbitration with integrity is not an oxymoron. It starts with education. Thanks to the incredible work of Gil Vernon, Kathy Miller, and many others in the Academy, our education initiative is well advanced. In partnership with the Center for the Study of Dispute Resolution at the University of Missouri School of Law, thank you, Professor Hele. Raphael, are you in the room? Well, he's working on this great website. We've launched a website called arbitrationinfo.com. Let me repeat it, arbitrationinfo.com. If you haven't looked at it, look at it soon. Not now, not while I'm talking, please. I mean, please put down your iPads and cell phones. Arbitrationinfo.com was launched in 2016. early 2016. It provides authoritative, objective, and comprehensive information about workplace arbitration. It highlights basic arbitration facts, such as how arbitrators are chosen and the importance of neutrality. It provides a link to the Academy's Code of Professional Responsibility for labor arbitrators and our fairness guidelines for mandatory employment arbitration. It contains a section on frequently asked questions, such as, can an arbitration award be appealed? Unfortunately, yes. But it explains the deference that's accorded to arbitration awards. It showcases in-depth material, such as a study into why discipline imposed by the Oakland Police Department was so frequently overturned by arbitrators. The answer? Poor investigation and poor preparation. It provides commentary on important new court cases and reports on breaking news and events, like the continuing saga of Tom Brady's deflated balls. Footballs. It was like too easy. The Academy and the university are proudly advertising this website to professionals in our field, students, academics, and especially the media. Arbitrationinfo.com is an important initiative in the battle to separate fact from fiction and to distinguish high-integrity arbitration under collective bargaining agreements from other types of arbitration. It's an important step in getting out a message about what arbitration done properly should look like. Education also lies in our own hands as individuals with a stake in the reputation of labor arbitration. When the integrity of labor arbitration is attacked, it's incumbent on us, everyone in this room, to respond. We're proud of what we do, and we're articulate. When the New York Times ran a series attacking consumer arbitration, justifiably for the most part, Academy members sent letters to the editor and posted online commentaries pointing out the difference between unfair systems of involuntary consumer and employment arbitration and arbitration under collective bargaining agreements. My favorite response was from NAA member Barry Goldman, who wrote an LA Times op-ed piece. He wrote that, quote, when one party has all the power, it's what's known as cram-down arbitration. You want to join this health club, sign up for that cable TV plan, sign this impenetrable multi-page agreement. Voila. I'm from Canada, I can use French words. Yeah, ooh la la, yeah, there you go. See, I mean, it's a bilingual audience. Voila. You've agreed to arbitrate any dispute that may arise and to do so under whatever terms the drafter of the contract may have chosen to impose. In cram-down arbitration, obviously one of the parties has zero bargaining power. Arbitration's not the problem. The greedy and cynical perversion of arbitration is the problem. Defending labor arbitration and educating the public are not the exclusive domain of neutrals. The system belongs to the parties. You have a role to play. Advocates, human resource managers, union representatives, and labor relations agency have a stake in the preservation of our system of labor arbitration and ought to be speaking out when it's unfairly attacked and undermined. Or if not speaking out publicly, privately counseling. Now, I use counseling advisedly. Counseling privately can be, think about it before you say something. So privately talking to your own people are the consequences of doing and saying things that destroy public confidence in a labor arbitration system that served the parties well for over 70 years. One of the more powerful responses to the attack on the New York City arbitrator who had the courage to give police officers less than they thought they were worth was a decision of a public foundation to honor that arbitrator with a major public award celebrating his contributions to labor management relations. I'm not suggesting for a moment that he would not have been the recipient of this honor had 1,000 cops carrying a coffin not picketed his home. But the timing was exquisite. The fact that the selection committee included prominent labor leaders spoke volumes about what others thought of the police brotherhood's tactics. If education and speaking out in defense of our system is a first strategy, the second strategy is a recognition that the Academy cannot do this alone. We need alliances with organizations that understand and value neutral, independent labor arbitration within our overall collective bargaining system. We can help each other project our shared underlying belief in effective and fair workplace dispute resolution. One such organization is the Labor and Employment Relations Association, LIRA. LIRA members are academics, union representatives, management officials, neutrals, including a number of our own members. Many of our regions already work with local chapters of LIRA to co-host meetings and conferences that focus on education and outreach. We're now cooperating at the national level by having reciprocal branded sessions at each other's national conferences. 3 members of the Academy spoke at the recent Minneapolis conference of LIRA, and Professor Alexander Colvin from Cornell University is going to present a session tomorrow morning on workplace issues that are just over the horizon that are going to affect labor relations and all of our practice as arbitrators. That's one thing we can do. We can work together. Another organization we've partnered with is the College of Labor and Employment Lawyers. Together we produced a wonderful film called The Art and Science of Labor Arbitration that shone a very flattering light on the Academy and its most illustrious members. We've worked with the FMCS, the Labor and Employment section of the American Bar Association, and the AAA on the Academy's Code of Professional Responsibility for Labor Arbitrators and guidelines on due process protocols for non-union employment arbitration and mediation. We certainly need to work with organizations to deal with some of the problems in consumer arbitration. So we need to form alliances, we need to do education, we need to work together. If education and alliances are fairly uncontroversial, and in fact are already well underway, what I'm about to say next, my third recommendation, suffers no such fate. Let me make clear that these are my own views and not the official position of the Academy. I believe that the Academy should take a position in support of the right to collective bargaining. Under the legal systems in both Canada and the United States, employees have a right to choose for or against unionizing and engaging in good faith collective bargaining with their employers. Whether or not employees choose to exercise those rights is up to them. But their right to make that choice pursuant to our labor laws ought to be part of the DNA of the Academy. Why do I believe this is important? The obvious answer is that without collective bargaining, there's no labor arbitration. What we do as labor arbitrators flows from the collective bargaining agreement. I'm hardly the first president to comment on the implications of the disappearance of collective bargaining for labor arbitration and more generally workplace justice. Gil Vernon, in his 2011 speech, expressed it as eloquently as I have seen. He referred to collective bargaining as a value system that encompasses 1, the human dignity of 2 people to stand together to ask an employer for consideration in the workplace. 2, the moral obligation of an employer to give dignified consideration to those requests. And 3, the economic freedom of both the employer and the employees to say no to one another. 2 years later, Sarah Adler, in her presidential address, said, quote, "Everyone who gives it a moment's thought knows that the NAA supports collective bargaining. We wouldn't exist without it." So why not make that support explicit? 3 reasons are most often advanced. First, it would be seen as self-serving. And it's true. Most of us make our living from labor arbitration and have a stake in its continued existence. So what? That doesn't disqualify us from speaking out any more than a judge who proclaims that she supports the Constitution. Sure, I make a nice living, and my kids are very happy because of it. And Daphne, too. Although she does quite all right on her own. But I became an arbitrator, and I suspect most of you here did too, because I value a process that enables workers and managers to resolve disputes peacefully and respectfully, that brings industrial justice for both parties to the workplace. I'm proud to be an arbitrator because a well-functioning labor arbitration system contributes to a better civil society. The fear that endorsing the right to collective bargaining might jeopardize the perception of neutrality that's so crucial to the Academy is a second reason offered for not going down this road. I recognize it's a legitimate concern. The difference between remaining fiercely neutral on any given case while endorsing the framework within which that case is being heard is a nuance that will be lost on some. And make no mistake, that ideological opponents to any form of collective employee rights won't care about the nuances anyways. But I doubt if such groups see us as neutral in any event, because by working as labor arbitrators, we implicitly accept that employees have enforceable collective rights. Any endorsement needs to be carefully and cautiously worded. We need to make clear that at the same time as we are endorsing the system of rights and responsibilities under which we decide cases, we're reconfirming our neutrality on any given case. I admit that threading the eye of this needle may not be simple, but I'm confident that there are enough bright people in this organization to construct a defensible and appropriate formula. The third reason that gives pause is the proposition that collective bargaining as a system of employee representation is on the way out as our economy transforms into what I've referred to already as the gig economy. Work and workplaces are transitory, and the very definition of an employee on which the collective edifice is based is no longer relevant. Or even if collective bargaining remains relevant for some, labor policy is so broken that it's almost impossible for workers to actually gain collective bargaining rights anymore. We would be hitching our wagon to the past, not the future. All that may be true, but supporting the right to collective bargaining is not meant to be mutually exclusive of any other forms of collective representation or individual contract rights under which fair forms of arbitration might thrive. Endorsing one form of employee voice at this time in our history is not the same as forsaking all other forms of employee voice that may follow, and for which our skills as neutral, independent, and experienced arbitrators may be equally valuable. In short, we hold ourselves out as experts in labor arbitration, but labor arbitration can't be divorced from collective bargaining. To endorse one and not the other is disingenuous. I'm not going to pretend that the Academy's endorsement of the right to collective bargaining will arrest a decline in bargaining coverage. 30 years ago, maybe. Today, I don't think so. But sometimes we do things because it's the moral thing to do. The right of workers to freely choose whether they want to be represented for collective bargaining purposes is the hallmark of pluralistic, democratic societies. The right is enshrined in U.S. and Canadian labor law. It's enshrined in international law. To support this right sends a message that this right is important and is part of the foundation of societies like ours. It ought to be part of the foundation of the Academy. Not everyone agrees with my position. I know that. As Academy members are aware, I initiated a survey on this question, on the questions I'm raising with this speech. About 180 of our 600-plus members responded, and a substantial majority favored endorsing the institution of collective bargaining. However, not nearly enough of our members spoke. I can't say whether it was because they thought endorsing collective bargaining was a bad idea, inertia is too strong a force, or maybe people just don't like surveys. And people kind of hit the delete button very quickly when they get an email. It's also obvious from the many very articulate comments that were made by those who responded, the issue is a very divisive one that provokes strong feelings both for and against endorsement. Ultimately, whatever the Academy does, if anything, will be because the members agree it should happen. My intention has been to start this conversation. Now it's up to the membership and future leaders to decide if we want this conversation to continue, and if so, how. As for me, I'll do whatever I can to help. For now, I can say it's been an enormous privilege to serve as Academy President, and I thank you for that honor. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That's all, folks. Enjoy the next sessions.